I bet. Let's do this low-key presentation on land use and development regulations. So first thing that I'm going to have you add to your engineering notebook is what in the world is land use planning? Well, it is just planning for long-term growth of an area. So any municipality, any city is going to do this. They're going to have a long use planning committee. The purpose is to preserve public health, safety, welfare, maintain compatible development within an area, provide light and access. So it's really just trying to make sure that things go together well within a city. You see the pencil icon right here. I just want to talk about this one. Maintain compatible development within an area. You generally don't want to have like a manufacturing plant right next to a private residential house, which is also then right next to a commercial store, which is next to, like, that just doesn't work. It's weird. It doesn't make sense. There's weird noise issues. So that's why there's things called ordinances that maintain compatible development within an area. So make sure you make a note of that as a big reason for urban planning. So again, that word I mentioned before, it's called an ordinance. An ordinance regulates how you use the land and make sure you use it properly, and it talks about the allowed uses on the property, how big it can be, the building, what kind of access you have, different parking lot designs, what landscaping is required. These are called ordinances, and it is just to make sure that there is some sort of law and order within your city. So zoning is the most common use of land use regulation. And you have a zoning map that tells you where you can use certain things. If any of you have ever played SimCity in any capacity, you'll note that there were like residential and commercial and industrial areas, and that's exactly what we have going on here in this city. So we're going to take a look at that. Here's a map of a city called Noblesville, Indiana, and if you squint really hard and close both your eyes, you can probably read this down here. This orangish one right here says low density single family suburban residential. So the orangish one is a residential. As you look through here, you're going to see all sorts of different ones. This blue and like teal, orangish, whatever color it is, I can't tell. It does say business down here. So if we zoomed into this, we could see all these different values that are showing what this land use map is used for and what could be built on each one of them. What you should note is that it's all only within the city boundary. So I'm going to give you an example later on where you have Lafayette, and then you'll see right next to it is Louisville, and Louisville is going to be a color like this is a color of white. White is something on here, but that is that's not actually a designation. That's just a different city. So just be careful with that. So zoning designations, here's the 6 that I'd like you to write down, because there are just six good examples of them. And that way you have 6 examples that you can use. So residential, commercial, industrial, conservation zones, scenic zones, recreational zones. So please go ahead and write these 6 zone types down. That way you have some zone examples, and you can always pause it and you can take a look at some of these down here. You can see industrial, business, etc. So go ahead and write those 6 down so that you have some examples of different types of zoning that can be used. Land use ordinances are also based on map zones. The development in each zone designation is controlled by regulations specific to that zone. So in a residential zone, you may have zone regulations for residential that say you can only build 2 stories high. In a typical neighborhood, neighborhoods don't want to have 3-story buildings because it cuts down on their views. So that'd be an example of a zone regulation specific to that zone. A lot of these, actually all of these, are published online now into these code books or city ordinance books. So you can get to them by MuniCode or AmLegal. We're going to take a look at some with respect to Lafayette. Here's one from the city of Lafayette. And the city of Lafayette has adopted the following codes. They're actually using the building code from 2015. Now that's a little bit old, and depending on when you're watching this video, it may update. But the point is, they don't pick the most recent building code, International Building Code, because they want to make sure that, when you do that, then a lot of things need to be changed, and your inspectors need to be up to date, and you may have to make some changes in different buildings, and so they always stay behind a little bit. And you can see they're maintaining the 2015 code for everything except for National Electric Code, which is 2020. So oftentimes cities will lag behind the International Building Code model by a number of years, just to make sure that all of their officials can be caught up to speed. So what in the world is International Building Code? So please write this down. IBC stands for International Building Code. You got to make sure you know that acronym because we're just going to call it the IBC. Local municipalities adopt their own. I said Lafayette uses the 2015. Sometimes they have their own modifications. Like they may say, well, the IBC 2015 says you have to do this, but we're also going to require that you have sprinklers in every house, even though it might not be a requirement. We're in a high fire zone, so we're going to require that. So those modifications specifications are published on the internet for everybody to see, and every engineering firm has these. You get really familiar with them, which is another reason why when you upgrade to a new model or a new code book, then everybody has to be rereading and figuring out what those things are. So as far as classification, buildings are classified in two important ways. So please write this down. You see the pencil. Occupancy, and we're going to talk about what that means, and then construction type. So really you're classifying by occupancy and construction type. Just write those two words down, occupancy, construction type. I'm going to give an example of what those things mean. So that'll come in just a second. So the first one is occupancy. So you can do this in a new tab and kind of play me in the background if you want. If you Google the 2015 International Building Code, even if that's not what Lafayette is currently using, just do this because it's probably still published. And then move your mouse over to the occupancy chapter. As you can see right here, it's chapter 3, use and occupancy. And you'll see that there are different occupancy groups. So I have it open right now. And this is our occupancy. You can see I have assembly group A, business group B, educational group E, factory F, and so on. These are the different groups. That's what occupancy means. So when I go back here and I say we're classified by occupancy, that's what that means. So a school is a classification E in the occupancy classification. Then we'll do an example here. If we look over to the business group, that is section 304, business group classification. And we can take a look at this by identifying different type of businesses. So in this business group, if we were going to build for example, a bank, then we would go over to here and we would look for bank, and you can see it right away right here. So bank is a business group B. There are different occupancy groups that we can find. So let's go to the next one. What if you wanted a Nike outlet store? So what in the world would an outlet store be? Well, we can kind of scroll down here. We have lots of different things. Man, that take a long time to find. So I'm going to Control F and I'm going to look up just store. And let's see if we can find an example, retail or wholesale store. And what group is that? That's a mercantile group, so that would be a group M. So in class, this is something that we did. We just kind of would do a quick search for these things and see if we could find out what their occupancy was. The reason we're doing this is when you build your own commercial building, you are going to need to know what your group is. So if you decide to build a community library, then we search for here. We would go to library. It looks like I don't have library on this because it's an assembly group. And assembly group library is going to show up in one of the, there we go, libraries. So that was a little tricky, but that's an assembly group A3. So whatever you decide to do, you're going to have to go into the IBC and you're going to have to figure out what its occupancy is. So these were a couple other examples. Okay, the next thing you're going to need to write down is the construction type. So I would pause this and write down just like this, 1 through 5, maybe draw yourself a little image of these and then write down what each of these things is. Go ahead and do that now. All right, hopefully you paused and wrote that down. So construction type 1, you can see it is very strong. Steel framing with concrete, really strong. Very, very fireproof. But then you go down and down and down and down. And this one you can see that's just like any material allowed. That would be like framing, like wooden houses. That is the least fireproof. So after you've drawn all those down in the margin, let's put these arrows. So you have increasing fire resistance from 5 up to 1. So that means 5 is the least fire resistant, 1 is the most fire resistant, and that increases evacuation time. So evacuation time for a house, which is probably going to be this construction type 5, we don't need a very long evacuation time because there's generally not many people in a house if there's a house fire. So the evacuation time is pretty low. That's why you can make it out of any material like wood studs. But if you have a school, then you have thousands of people or 1,000 people in there. Like our school has close to 2,000 people in it at full capacity. That's where you need to have a lot of time for evacuation. So it also means that you're going to cost a lot more for construction. So your type 1 costs a lot more than your type 5. Then we also have a different subcategory where a type 1A is the most fire resistance, a type 1B is a little less, and then type 2A, type 2B, and so on. So fire resistance of 1A is definitely a little bit more than 1B. You can see that for type 4, the HT, that just means heavy timber. If we go back to this, there's not an A and B on that one. So now we look at table 503 in the IBC, and that helps you figure out the intended type that you have to build. What do you build your material out of? So if you're going to make let's go to table 500, and we'll go to 503. And this tells you how big your building can be, where it looks like we're on 504. So if you have a classification, occupancy classification, like I think the one was a mercantile. If I have a mercantile and I have NS is no sprinklers, S is sprinklers. Oh, Mr. Thomas, how'd you know that? Well, I went down here and I just look at the little notes on the bottom, and that's how you figure things out in a table. NS is not a sprinkler. Well, we would have to have a sprinkler system. So if we do a mercantile sprinkler system, this tells you, according to this, the buildable height in feet. This tells you how tall the building can be. So if you build the material out of any material allowed, you can build it up to 70 feet tall. That's pretty tall. But if you want to build it out of, I don't know, like just steel framing, you can go up to 85 feet because it is greater fire resistance. And if you use steel and concrete, type 1A, you can build it UL, which means unlimited height. That's where you have skyscrapers. They're all steel and concrete. So by knowing the classification, you see what sprinklers are, and then you're like, okay, how tall do I want to build this? And that tells you what materials you have to use, whether type 1 through type 4. If you continue down, this tells you how many stories, and then there's also total number of square feet, which I missed somewhere in here. So that's going to be up here a little bit further, is total number of square feet. So that's how you get some of that information from that. And that's really all you need to know for this. So when you do the assignment on zones, you're going to use some of that zoning information. When you do it on codes, you're going to have to go into the IBC, and you're going to have to figure out how tall it can be, how many stories it can be based on your classification, and total number of square feet, etc. So this right here is total allowable area in square feet. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. Good luck.